Well, alright, we're back for part 4. And, as predicted, the rebuild didn't go very well on the factory carburetor, so I ordered a Weber. We're about to dive into this shiny new thing, and the tuning is the same, so we're going to go over the tuning for both this as well as the factory carburetor because it's all identical, so hang in there. Alright, so there's a few differences between the factory carburetor and the replacement Webers. However, they're, for the most part, going to be functionally identical. They're going to mount the same. There's some modifications that you have to do to these, or to the vacuum routing to use them in a lot of the stock setups, because they don't have all the vacuum ports open and available like the factory carburetors do, and of course they lack, let me turn this one over, it's later, the PCV port. So see right here, this is your port for the PCV valve. It goes through and into this bare area right here. This particular carburetor does not have that. It's solid. However, if you were extremely careful and you could stay straight through here, you can drill through this and add that steel insert for the PCV valve. Then you won't have to try and find another vacuum port on the intake to run your PCV valve to. If you don't do this, typically on the choke side, right here on the bottom of the intake, is a vacuum port on cars that had power brakes. Those of you that do not have power brakes, there will be just a plug there. You can remove that plug and add a port and run your PCV valve to there, and I'll show you on the engine where that's at. The other thing you can do is this one does not have the vacuum port completely drilled all the way through on here, although it is blank and it is centered already. One could drill that port if they needed to add it. One other thing with these, they do not have a bowl vent. The factory carburetor has the bowl vent tube right here. These have a blank for it, and if you remove the top, it's open on the bottom side. So again, like adding the PCV valve port, you could add a port for your bowl vent. However, it's not necessary. They vent through here, so it'll always be inside the air filter housing. The other change is you'll notice the fuel inlet on the factory carburetor has the extra spot for the fuel filter. This has a fuel filter. It's just inside here rather than in line. You want to try and find these that have the threaded fuel inlet, because you can then adapt your threaded line to here by using a thread-in adapter that bottoms out like this fitting does and allows you to use the tapered tube nut fitting on the other side. That's something I would suggest, especially with the vibration that these engines can have. The rubber line can work loose. That's another reason why they don't want you, like in certain race applications, they don't want you to have a press-in fitting here. They want you to take it out and thread it for a barbed fitting that threads in, so you don't have that coming out during a race. One thing I'm working on doing right now is looking to see if these can be modified in any way, like the late model carburetors are, to take the solenoid. If that's the case, that's going to open up the carburetors available to people that need to keep them emissions compliant, or at least visually. And also want the computer to still be able to control the mixture enrichment through the computer. I don't see too many of you wanting to do that, so I'm not going to be putting a rush on this, but that's something that is in the future. So anyway, what I'm going to end up doing here is we're going to install this first rather than tune the one that's on the car. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to video what happened with the one on the car. It works. It works and it revs out okay. The problem is there's just zero getting it to idle, and it's all over the place. It's idling too high, and part of that is because the throttle shafts are completely wore out on that carburetor. Also, when I cleaned it, I cleaned out all the areas that would have been leaking in the main body, and so that carburetor is junk, as I assumed it would be. But I wanted to at least go through it and show how to assemble it for you guys. So now we're going to get into the actual installation and tuning, because again, it's just the same as the factory carburetor. So I'm going to move these out of the way, and you'll see these again here in just a second. On the factory carburetor, this is covered, and you'll have to, like I was saying, you have to break that open. But this is your Carb idle mixture screw, and you want to start that when it's bottomed out, from where it's bottomed out, lightly bottomed out. You want to start it in until it just seats. You'll feel it, and don't go any further than that. There's really, you'll force it, you'll ruin it, like I was telling you here. And you're gonna back this out 1.5 turns. There's half. There's one. And there's half. We want to start at 1.5 turns out. Now, your idle speed screw, which is over here by the throttle, it's in a slightly different location on the factory carburetor, but it's in this spot. You want the choke open, so it's resting on the idle screw itself. If the choke is closed, it's in fast idle mode, and it comes up off the seat. So you hold the choke open and get it to sit on there. And what you're going to do is you're going to notice that it comes away from its seat there. As soon as it touches, you want to give it a half a turn in. So I want to run it in until it just seats. I gotta watch it now because I did it for the camera and then I lost my, okay. So from here it's where it's just going to seat, and you're going to go 1/2 turn, and you'll see the butterfly right there peek open. And you'll see it peeks open right there. That's the base setting. All we got to do now is go out and put this on the car, and then once it starts, it'll fill up full fuel as you're cranking, or you can fill through this area, not this area, but this area with a cut, like a little cap full of fuel to get the bowl full, and it should fire right off, and it should run. And when you hook the choke up, it should run on a high idle until the choke starts to come open. And as the choke comes open, this is when you're going to start noticing that you're going to need to change some things, because as that choke comes open, it's probably going to start idling really low. It may even idle low to the point where it stalls. It may even idle a little rough. And well, that's the whole point of adjusting this and this that we're going to go over when we go outside. One thing I want to address before we go any further with this. This is a Weber specific problem, not a factory carburetor problem, because on a factory carburetor you cannot remove the idle circuit jets. They're made into the body of the carburetor. You can remove them, but you need to be a carburetor guy with carburetor tools, and it's a lot of process. It's a big process to try and get it out. That's the whole reason why you want to boil your carburetor, so you don't have to deal with those tiny little pieces and passages in there. You just get it to come out. But at any rate, when you get a Weber, they always come up set up out of the box with the idle circuit backwards. There's one on either side, and there's a 50 and a 60. On the Chevette, at least in my experience, has been the 50 needs to be on the primary side and the 60 needs to be on the secondary side before you even start, because otherwise it's just too much. So you end up taking these out and they unscrew. They shouldn't have a lot of pressure on them, but there's a little number right along the base there, right above my thumbnail there. I don't know if that's even going to focus. Probably not. But it says 60 on it. Excuse me, people, I'm learning my new teeth. So, words are going to sound a little funny. This one says 50 on it, yeah. So they were in the wrong place. Just take the 50 and put it over here and screw it back in. And as it seats, just give it a little snug, and that's done. And put the 60 on the secondary side. Give it a little snug and it's done. Now I have an additional 50 out there at the garage I may try later. I'm also going to do something different with the fuel line later. I'll do the adapter at a later date, just for testing purposes. And for you guys, I'm going to just adapt with a small piece of rubber hose and a couple of clamps. There's only 3 to 5 psi going through there, so that's sufficient. But do know that I will have an adapter here, and I will likely show that in the next video. One more thing with the factory carburetor, I said it was going to come back up here. There are linkage issues if you have a car that has an automatic transmission. Because as you'll notice, this carburetor has an adapter linkage on it, where you can put a stud on it and run it with the cable. And that'll work with a manual transmission car. You can make that work. But you need the kickdown part right here. This is where your throttle cable would normally pull it, and this other one pulls in the opposite arc, and it pulls the downshift cable for the automatic transmission. Now, some people can live with manually downshifting their automatic. They don't have to have that hooked up. However, I like it to work, and I really also like these to work as much like a factory carburetor as I possibly can. So what I end up doing is, if you'll notice, the throttle shaft on these has flats on it. When you unscrew this and you pull this off, there's 2 flats on either side of the throttle shaft, and they line up just like the flats on this throttle shaft. The difference is the factory doesn't make it so you can take it apart. So you have to grind that off. What we're going to do is I'm going to grind that off. I'm going to cut this right here, because I do not need the back part. I only need the face of this. And we're going to take this linkage rod out. After we take that off, this will come off. you'll take your Weber and you will remove the lock and then the nut and then the linkage rod as this is coming off. We're gonna and then install that linkage on there, tighten it back up after the linkage rod is put in there, and we're gonna give it a little test, make sure it runs through okay, and it's done. It's now adapted and can be used with your automatic downshift cable. Out to the car now. Alright, so you can see I've got the new Weber on here, and as of right now I just simply have a rubber fuel line, fuel rated rubber hose going from the fuel line to the nipple on the inlet. I have the Pcv valve routed to that port over here. I'll show you here. I'm going to get you off the tripod. Right here is that port on the intake, typically used for power brakes. When they are not used for power brakes, you can use that for the PCV. As of right now, I just have this full-length hose here because I want to use this length in its entirety later for another project. This is just temporary till tomorrow. One other thing I had to address while I was here, and it's a good thing to check, the vacuum fitting for my automatic transmission. Typically what happens is you'll get moisture right here on the top. This fits inside there, and then there's a rubber sleeve that goes over it. It's just vacuum line. You can see that top part of that is still in there, but this is what happens to them. And this has been an ongoing vacuum leak for a very long time. I've been chasing, and I knew it was somewhere on the intake, but I couldn't quite find it. Partly because the first time I looked at that, it wasn't broken, so I would assume that it was probably getting close. So now I just went ahead and robbed another one off of another intake that I've got. I'm going to change that out. I'm going to go ahead and that one on there with a new vacuum line and get that set. Now, as of right now, again, this is how I connected the fuel line. Made sure that the clamp is on the other side of the hump in the line there, the flare in the line. Eventually this is going to be a threaded fitting here that this will thread into. That'll keep it from vibrating loose and giving me issues. So I'm going to go ahead and throw you guys on the tripod again. I'm going to connect this, and we'll get to firing it up. Like I said, it's just a chunk of rubber hose. Nothing fancy. It just has to seal that connection back there, so I'm just going to cut a little piece here. Now I have fuel already in the bowl of this carburetor. I have made sure that all 4 of the base nuts are tightened down. Run crisscross, go in a circle, and then maybe another crisscross. Just snug them down in stages until they're all tight. And you don't have to go Gorilla tight, they just have to go tight. Alright, now, with any luck, I'm going to bump the key. I do not have power to this choke at the moment, but I'm going to tag off of the red power cable I've got right over here. There's 12 volts on that. If you have an air-conditioned car, there'll be a plug here with a big red wire that you can access 12 volts off of for testing things. yeah, so choke's closed. This is out of the box. This is set up as it was on the table, where I said we had 1.5 turns out on our Carb mixture screw and a half turn in from just touching on the idle speed screw. And as long as the starter doesn't give me any issues, it should just take right off. That's the best that this car has idled the whole time I've owned it. So what we're going to be messing with here is I'm going to shut this back off, and then I'm going to go ahead and put 12 volts from this over to here to get my choke working, and let this thing come up to operating temperature. And then after it's at operating temperature, I'll get you guys back on here for the adjustment sequence. I'll give it just a little rev, see what it sounds like. Pretty clean. Alright, so the engine's now warmed up. The choke is now open. Your engine may or may not be running slower than this. Usually out of the box, 1/2 turn on the idle speed screw in and 1.5 out on the idle mixture screw typically is a good ballpark to start with this. Obviously it's sitting here running. I did have to bump the idle speed screw 1/2 of an additional turn. At no point in the tuning process should your idle speed screw ever go more than 1.5 turns open. Once you're above 1.5 turns open, you are into the transition circuit of this, and you are no longer on the idle circuit and saving fuel. You are now burning fuel that you do not need to burn in an idle situation. So be aware of that. So no more than 1.5 turns in from just touching and starting to open on the idle speed screw. Right now I'm at 1 full turn open. I believe I am, let's see. Half. You hear it picking up speed as I'm turning this in. We're looking for a smooth, steady idle. But the leanest possible idle that we can get. Alright. So here we are back at 1.5 turns out. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it out a little bit at a time. Additionally, 1/4 turn, one-quarter turn to 1/2 a turn at the max, and you're going to listen. You don't need any tuning instruments at this particular point. You just want to listen to the engine carefully. I'm going to go 1/4 of a turn, and you're going to hear it change. I'll go 1/4 more. Okay, it's just starting to run kind of bad and starting to get shaky. This is where you want to stop. Okay, and you want to remember how many turns you just turned it from your base setting. And you're going to go back half that much. We went out 1 turn to get it to run rough, so we're going to go back half a turn. Hear the idle come up. At this point, you can now put a tachometer on it and set your carb idle speed to match the car's recommendation, somewhere between 700 and 800 RPM typically. At this point, you're pretty well ready to go, unless you have choke settings that you will need to change when this thing is cold. It's ready for a drive. Alright, well, I mean, I took it for a drive. It's not bad. I don't know about this particular carburetor. I took a chance and got this one real cheap. Cheaper than I normally go. And two things happened. While it's been just as good as most Webers that I get out of the box, be it aftermarket or actual Weber, this one doesn't seem to be jetted quite the same. And that's not something you would normally have to worry about. They usually come out of the box pretty good. However, I think this one might need a little bit of a step down, which is fine. I've got jets. I'll fix that tomorrow. But otherwise, it's been good. Fine. Just drive right on down the road, just like nothing ever happened to it. So, I guess in the meantime, I will see you guys on the flip side here. The next how-to video that I'm going to be doing is one that I had planned on doing right before Christmas. However, due to some circumstances beyond everybody's control, Christmas got pushed back just a little bit for this video. We're going to touch a little bit on day 2 modifications. What would you have done back in the day when you got a new car? Usually the first thing you do is wheels and tires, maybe exhaust, maybe a stereo. So stay tuned, we'll see what we get into first. In the meantime, you guys keep the shiny side up. And one more thing before I go real quick. You may have noticed that the channel has changed from the T-Body Garage to Performance. T-Body Performance. And that is because there was a issue with the name and somebody else that has something they're doing with the name, and rather than the drama, I decided to change it. So you guys will probably notice the next few videos of mine without an entry or without an intro or outro of my my logo, and that's because I'm getting ready to change it. So in the meantime, I'll just draw up something quick to put in there, and you guys will see the new logo soon. So stay tuned. Same good stuff, same great content. You guys are awesome.